Okay, so to talk about trash, I want to clump together a few study goals. Um, I used to do this as one big lecture, so you'll see later on in this video that I have some photographs of my whiteboard, and I'll need you to make a couple of sketches and then add some words to your sketches. Um, Conceptually, these all go together, so we'll come back to fill in other gaps, but there's this one clump of content that I want to deliver as a single video. Um, First of all, the one-way material economy is stupid. We do all this work with all these consequences and all these impacts, ecological, social, long-term, short-term impacts, to get the stuff that we can only use for a little while, and then we're like, oh, don't work no more. We just put it back in the ground. But now it's in a form where it's useless. You can't go back and make something out of that trash. It's just been made useless. That's just dumb. That's just dumb. I gotta say, that's just not, we're running out of stuff to use. We're running out of places to put the trash. It just don't make no sense. It don't make no sense. The one way material economy is stupid. It's reckless. If I were wealthy, it would still be stupid. If I were in the third world, it would still be stupid. It's just, sorry, I said it. If I were in the least developed nation, it would still be stupid. Um, so anyway, there's this question about the history of waste management. And remember that when you don't have a lot of trash, you just leave it in the backyard and you'll probably never have to see it again. So like whenever I go through Baja, like all of the resorts or whatever, they don't have like landfills or waste management. They're not like used to dealing with very much trash except all the stuff that they have to buy to keep the tourists happy. So whenever you throw stuff into a trash dumpster, my favorite place to go in Baja, we have a vision that like, oh, it's in that dumpster. Now it's going to go somewhere. But the dude that comes around every morning to take away those dumpsters, he just drives it up the hill and dumps it in a canyon. So it's probably going into our drinking water at that resort. Um, Back in the day when there wasn't a lot of trash and there weren't a lot of humans and the dirt just seemed endless, we would just dilute and disperse, just kind of like by the time it reaches you it's like a single mug, and when you're done you just throw it into the yard and you drive over it a couple times and it's rocks and you forget about it. um, Globally this is still pretty common because there's a lot of people that are really spread out with not a lot of stuff. But as population density increases and those humans have bigger and bigger material footprint, like if you took all the stuff that I have on my property and you hit it with a bulldozer, it would be like 2 foot thick layer of trash left behind. We have a lot of material. So now we clump all that and try to keep it there. That's called concentrate and contain. That's basically landfills. And that's better because you're not spreading trash everywhere. You're not looking at it everywhere. Landfills are better than open dumping. That's for sure. Um, but we have a lot of stuff. And the more the economy seems to grow, the more our material volume grows with it. Um, Most of us measure our wealth by how much stuff we have. And so the wealthier you get, the more stuff you've got. And so we're literally running out of places to put the trash. There's too many people, not enough dirt. The trash piles get really big and you got to start another pile. And, like, where are you going to find that much dirt? Like, landfills are not um, owned by the government. You don't do this on federal or public land. These are usually private enterprises, and like you got to pay a lot to dump trash if the dude had to pay $100 million for that chunk of soil. Um, so landfills are dumb. What are we going to do with all this stuff? The future would be a zero waste economy where nothing is made for the dump. Every item that we make should have a plan of what we can do with it after. And the more you can keep using something, the less it goes to the trash. Now, there's always going to be some waste. There's some stuff you just can't use twice, like the hospital equipment and some construction equipment, stuff like that. But the goal is to get as close as possible to zero. And this is a mix. Like whenever we talk about zero waste, everybody's like, well, look at that guy and look at that guy. And like, well, they make this and like, oh, we don't have any rules about this. But we often forget that there's a lot of little things at different levels that could be done. I want to show you about this. There's a concept called diversion, which is to take the stuff that's heading for the landfill and put it somewhere else. You can imagine at your house, probably like my house, you've got one trash can for trash. Mine is brown. Then you've got one or two or three trash cans for recycling. Mine are blue. And then you've got another trash can for green waste. Mine is green. Excuse me. And what we're doing there is we're telling the trash company these things can all be routed toward recycling facilities, and this can be routed to mulch piling, and this is the only stuff that we should be routing. So we participate in the activity of diverting waste. We are doing part of the diversion. Pretty soon, our county will switch to what's called a single stream. I should have written that down. Sorry, you should write that down. Single stream waste system, where you put everything into one single container. It goes into one fleet of trucks. Those trucks go to one place, and all waste is sorted there by like cool robots and like artificial intelligence and magnets and stuff. We're building a very cutting edge single stream waste system right now. Our county's working on it. It's going to be pretty hot. The idea is that you don't have to do the diversion because we're all pretty bad at it. Everybody keeps putting pizza boxes into the recycling or whatever. And so they're going to have machines that are smarter than us handle all of that, because presumably there's more recycling that they could sell than we are protecting by our habits. It's like a national effort and a statewide effort to have more of our waste stream routed away from the landfill, called diversion. We're up to around 70%, which is spectacular. Statewide, our goal for 2025, I think, or for 2030, or for this year, I don't know. Statewide, the goal was to be statewide 75% diverted from the waste stream. But COVID has really crushed all of that. I heard a fascinating radio story. If I get a minute, I'll add it to Neo, about how COVID has affected diversion rates, because there's people that have to stand shoulder to shoulder to do all the sorting, and you can't do that with like masks and social distancing and people getting sick. And also the economies have slowed down all over the world that used to buy our recycled material. I'll talk more about that later. So anyway, for us to be at 70%, that's pretty good. Santa Barbara was about 20 years ahead of the curve that the rest of the state has been trying to follow. The only county that's better than Santa Barbara is San Francisco, I think, or I don't know if that's a county or not. But anyway, somewhere in the Bay Area, they're already over 90% diverted. That's pretty stellar, meaning that their trash finds other purposes beyond a landfill for about 90% of their total waste stream. That's kind of remarkable. So the goal is to like not make it trash, okay? Divert it from the waste stream. And there's a term for this, to find every single option, like what can we do with this? What can we do with this? There's a term for that. That's the next study goal. So I'm doing these together. That's called integrated waste management. Keep things from being landfilled by literally separating and sorting stuff out and finding a way to reuse or recycle or whatever, that stuff. And I'm going to give you a really crappy drawing, and you should pause and do your best to copy the drawing. And if the words don't make sense, don't worry, because I'll talk about the words. And you're going to need to add notes. Mine is the beginning of your notes, but if I clutter mine with all the writing, then you really can't read it. So here comes the drawing, and ignore some of the BS. So this is a photograph of my whiteboard, right? And so you could ignore this thing up here. You could ignore that thing up there. And if there's words you can't read, don't worry about it. This says zero waste, IWM, and I'll talk about all the other things. But look, here's our total waste stream, and we're trying to divert stuff away from ending up in the landfill. So take a second to copy this, and I'll continue to describe what each of these is. Hopefully you've drawn this. Excuse me, I don't have any water in here. I really blew that. So ways to shrink our waste stream. There's stuff that you can do, like a person like you, and there's stuff that our system has to do. So usually these are handled by the waste utility, which competes for a contract with the city or the state. And then there's these last minute options that the landfill can do, so that as little as possible makes it into the ground. And we'll describe landfills later. This used to be a 2-page drawing. Sorry, this used to be a big horizontal drawing on my whiteboard. I split that. So we're talking about the landfill here, and then I'll show you the other photo. All right, so let me show you some things. This is our total waste stream. And one of the things that we can do is just make less trash in the first place. These are habits that individual people do that reduce the amount of trash at the source, meaning don't buy as many things. Instead of buying a shovel that you know is only going to last a year, save up your nickel and dime, get a really good shovel, you pay more, but you're avoiding making a bunch of trash. This has become a really big deal for me. I'm super cheap, but I kind of know when I buy something like, dude, that's just gonna be trash. I probably shouldn't be buying this. Source reduction is ways to make less in the first place. Don't buy disposable stuff. Don't buy things you don't need. Buy things that last longer. Another thing that we can do is reuse. Like a lot of things we put in the trash because someone's like, yo, that's trash. But I don't know that it's necessarily trash. Like I keep my plastic bottles forever. Usually I have water in them, so I'm really frustrated today. But like, somebody else told me this is disposable. I have found that they're way better than steel bottles. If you drop these, they don't hurt your foot. They don't normally leak like steel bottles will usually do. I'm a rock climber, and so if you drop a steel bottle on the person below you, you can kill them. But if you drop a plastic bottle on the person below you, you'll make them wet, you might give them a bruise, but hopefully it's less deadly. These are much lighter than steel bottles, and weight is a really big deal when you have to carry stuff with you, like a lot of people do in the outdoors. I also like that these are flexible, so when it's done, you can flatten it out and stuff it in your backpack, and it doesn't use as much volume. I kind of dig these handy little bottle caps. If I want to feel manly, I can still unscrew that. If they get funky, I can finally recycle it then, but I get a lot of life out of these. Just one example. We used to build everything to be reusable. Glass bottles, for example, as you may know, in many parts of the world are washed and reused. They're a little bit bigger and denser. And then somebody figured out, like, man, it's just so much hassle. Let's just make really thin glass bottles. People will pay more, but then they don't have to deal with them, and we'll just throw them all out. So conceptually, stuff that you can do is make less stuff to be trash and find uses for things that would otherwise be trash. That's on you as a person. That's at home. Then systemically, there's a bunch of stuff that we can do. Like, what if we help people reuse things? You might know how a junkyard works. Like, the idea is that there's a lot of parts in your car that might be useful. So instead of just throwing it away, you could probably get a few $100 for that car, and somebody will sell the headrest and the seatbelt buckle or whatever. That's called a junkyard. Imagine if we treated cars like phones. Like, my $1,000 device, when this stupid button stops working, like my last phone did, it is very clunky trying to make it work without that button. Then you break the screen and it's like, oh, well, trash. And that's like $1.25 to produce, and the screen costs like $9 to produce. Even if you have to replace them, it's like $100 and like $150. But if you have to replace them both at that point, it's like, oh, screw it, it's just too much. What if cars were like that? Like, oh man, I got a flat. This isn't going to be worth it. You just like go to the dealership and buy yourself a new car. We decided along the way to accept more disposability, but the idea that the parts are useful can be regulated. We can standardize the parts that go into our cell phones so that they have more scrap usage and thus less waste. And of course, that would make them less cost. We just got to convince people to get with that plan. Anyway, disassembly and remanufacture is the idea that some stuff could still be scrapped into use again. I got to give it to them. Patagonia kind of had a cool idea. They take your crappy old Patagonia gear and they shred it up to make insulation. Like, that's kind of tight, because otherwise there's nothing you can do with that. It's all plastic clothing, you know, and like, now what? So you make plastic insulation. They even make like little patches out of the material, and I don't know, it's called the Common Threads program. I'm not a big fan of Patagonia, but I really did think that was kind of a thoughtful idea. They made like a junkyard system for Patagonia brand clothing. And of course, that keeps things out of the landfill. Right on. Think of the stuff that happens at your house, like the recycling. We got to talk a lot about recycling. I have to come back to recycling a little bit. But the idea goes that if your materials aren't jumbled together, you should be able to remelt it and use it again. Paper can get shredded up into paper fiber, and then you can press that into new paper. Plastic can get remelted and reshaped basically forever if you can keep the plastics separate. Same with glass. If you keep the glass separate, you can melt it down and just make new glass. And so recycling sounds awesome. Everybody's like, yeah, all right, recycle. And you should recycle. Let me just say you should recycle. It just turns out that systemically it's not quite as sweet as we would like it to be. Like, paper that comes straight from the paper mill is way better than paper that's been recycled. By the time you're done with it, pretty much all you can do is make toilet paper out of it. And you still have to cut that material with other material like cotton fiber or whatever. So interestingly, all the paper that's recycled on the planet doesn't have a lot of value because it doesn't have a lot of potential, right? It down cycles, meaning the quality goes down. So like, oh, that used to be really nice paper. I wrote my dissertation on that. And then it's toilet paper. By the time it's toilet paper, nobody wants it anymore. Or cardboard. Yeah, that down cycles to other card stock products, which down cycle to brown paper bags, which down cycle to maybe toilet paper or nothing. So what's interesting is recycling only has a limited potential. You can only get a little bit of life out of some stuff. Plus, the economies that used to buy our leftovers don't really need them anymore. It's a really narrow savings. Like getting brand new paper is only a teeny bit more expensive than doing the recycling. And when energy prices go up or labor prices go up, sometimes it's just not worth it to recycle because it takes a lot of work. And these materials are usually subsidized. There's tax dollars that help pay for the extraction of virgin materials, but not tax dollars that help pay for recycling. So there's a lot of fascinating economics involved. One of the biggest problems is that we often stick things together. So if you look at like a juice box, that's plastic stuck to mylar, stuck to paper with wax on it and plastic on the outside. There's no way to separate all that. So all of those layers would have been recyclable, but when you glue them all together, there's just no clean delamination process that's worth the effort. And so we make stuff that's not recyclable. And people mess it up too. This is the reason that Santa Barbara is no longer going to have us sorting things, is because we're not very good at it. And so we're hoping that the resource value of recycling could go up if we invested in smart robots that will do a better job of sorting than you and I do. Recycling is kind of cool. It makes a lot of sense for metal. Like aluminum, it's like you can reuse aluminum 1,000 times. It doesn't downcycle very much. And the energy cost of dealing with your used cans is obviously profitable compared to digging up aluminum and refining it out of the ground. In the United States, we don't have native aluminum mines. So it's a big international market with strategic implications to get virgin aluminum, or we can just use all that stuff that you were trying to throw away the other day. And like some materials, like metals, especially aluminum, super profitable, always a good idea. They will always be beneficial to recycle. Some stuff, less so. Glass, pretty mellow, pretty straightforward. It's kind of easy to recycle. You just got to wonder if you're close enough. Some things are really easy to recycle, but it's just not worth moving them around, like styrofoam. Styrofoam costs next to nothing because it's got very little material. That's why it's so light. It's mostly air, right? But it's mostly air that's still really bulky. So you got to pay a dump truck to drive like 14 pounds of styrofoam. And 14 pounds of styrofoam came from like a gallon of petroleum product. So like, yeah, I could buy that whole truck transportation cost, or I can put that same transportation cost into moving like 18,000 gallons of petroleum product. That's way cheaper. I'm going to get a lot more styrofoam out of that. So some things are inherently recyclable, like styrofoam, that nobody ever recycles because it doesn't make any sense economically. It's just not worth moving it around. It's just too much air, not enough resource. All right. So that's the recycling one. Mulch and organic waste, this is easy. Like, we should all be doing this. It's one of the biggest constituents of the waste stream. It ruins other products, and it's basically fertilizer one way or the other. So you can have a compost stream and a mulch stream, like a whole bunch of nutrients that can improve soil and a whole bunch of wood product that can cover up the soil. But these are valuable. Like at my house, I try not to use the green bin because I need all that stuff. So I make my own compost on site and I make my own mulch on site. But you know, if you don't have a space to use your compost and you use your mulch, every waste system should probably include compost and mulching. And we do have to separate the hazardous stuff. Some of our waste is really dangerous. Used medicine, used gasoline, paint, electronics, that stuff is bad. You can put it in the ground all you want, but you're just going to make your groundwater toxic. We've been doing that for years all over the country, and it's done all over the world. So one way to have less stuff in the waste stream is to realize that some of this is not going to be trash. We have to deal with it as hazardous material. That's a separate process. It's also a separate study goal. So I'll come back to it later. You can see that my waste stream is shrinking. And landfills, with the stuff that comes to them, they could still see some usability. Like maybe they can squeeze out the water, use that water after treatment for irrigation. In Japan, there's this really famous landfill that has this spectacular network of lotus pools where they grow these beautiful lotus because they have a system to squeeze out all the water from their waste stream and then treat it and then reuse that water. Like the idea is like, why are we getting rid of stuff that we work so hard to gather in the first place? There's a lot of energy that you can get from trash. Like if it's well sorted, you can burn it. You cannot burn mixed trash. We'll come back to this in the reader. Remember I said that. You don't want to burn mixed trash. That's extremely hazardous. But if your waste stream is well sorted, some of that stuff is burnable. Like, yo, that's energy just waiting to happen. Why bury it? Right? Like that. And organic material that's decomposing anaerobically makes methane, which is a dangerous greenhouse gas, but it's also natural gas that we need for energy. So like Los Angeles gets 10% of their electricity from methane that they capture in a couple of big landfills. So they take their landfill stuff, they let all of the methane bubble out, they capture the gas. I don't know how that works. They capture the gas, and then they use that gas to power electricity generation. And of course, there's a lot of nutrients left over in our wastewater. We should recover all of that. We're running out of phosphorus globally. Let's use it out of our waste stream. The basic principles that I'd like you to remember is we're trying to avoid things which are inherently toxic in their design. Like if you put toxins into stuff, you know it's going to make it a problem later. We should forget that anything should be used a single time. Like the only reason that these are single-use bottles is because everybody says they're single-use bottles. I'm not intelligent. It's not creative. It's just obviously incorrect that this is a single-use item. I've had this one for, I don't know, a couple of years maybe. I use them on the boat. I take them on road trips. There's always one or two next to my bed. There's always one or two in this room, and unfortunately they're all empty right now. Things don't have to be disposable. And we have to stop making stuff that becomes your problem to get rid of. Like, good luck trying to get rid of a big flat screen TV after it cracks. Good luck. You got to spend like $70 to dump that thing. Buyer problem. These are all design questions that we should change culturally. Now look, some of this stuff has to go into a landfill. You'll make another crappy drawing and then I'll explain. A landfill is not just a hole in the ground. We in the United States, we have laws about how to make a landfill sanitary. Specific requirements, there's just a few. If you can't read my drawings, don't worry, I'll explain. Once you have in the right place the hole in the ground, then you're going to add a layer of trash and you cover it up with dirt, and you add a layer of trash and you cover it up with dirt, and you add a layer of trash and you cover it up with dirt. That's a landfill. You can go see one at Tahigas. Some stuff just has to go into the ground. You never want to reuse medical stuff, some construction equipment, some construction material is not recyclable. A certain amount of our home trash just has to go into the ground. So in Santa Barbara County right now, we're putting about 30% of our waste stream straight into the ground, and this is how we do it. And to make it a sanitary landfill, it has to have 4 qualities. I'll explain them, and then we're done. Number 1, underneath your landfill, you need what's called an impermeable liner. Impermeable, like stuff can't go through it, liner. These are usually made of clay or plastic. Kind of like if you've ever seen a pond, like somebody installs a pond in their yard, there's like a sheet of thick black rubber. I got to see the building of a giant municipal landfill, and they had these rolls of plastic that were like as big around as my garage, like 20 feet tall, 20 feet wide, wide load. They were really, really long, and they would just unroll them down the hill, and then they would spray some stuff on it, and they'd unroll one next to it, and they just blanketed the hillside in all of these rolls of rubbery plastic, and they were all glued together to make an impermeable layer so that water can't go through. You all know how you make coffee? You take some stuff, you pour water through it, and that water interacts with the stuff so that it leaches, and you get some different kind of water. We like to drink the coffee stuff or tea, but trash tea is really bad. That's called leachate. Leachate. And you don't want that to enter your groundwater. You can ask people who grew up surfing at the pit. So the impermeable liner keeps the leachate from getting through the landfill. You can see that squiggly line, that's leachate. Legal requirement number 2, you have to cover it up with dirt every single day. So when I showed you the picture of Ealing's, there's the old trash, and every single day they would scrape some dirt from this side, come back over here, and spread it over the trash layers. So legal requirement number 2 to be a sanitary landfill, you have to compact soil over the trash so it doesn't fly around, so the seagulls don't take it all, right? You're trying to bury it, so you got to keep it buried. This isn't an open pile. It's compacted soil layers. Number 3, you have to do something with that leachate. This is a well that collects leachate. That trash tea, that's a hazardous material that you'll have to deal with separately. We'll talk about hazmat later. So number 3, it's required that you collect the leachate. And then finally, number 4, you have to go outside the landfill or beneath, sorry, that picture got cut off, beneath the landfill and look for more leachate to make sure it's not leaking, right? Like if you find toilet water underneath the house, that means your sewage system leaked. So you want to monitor to make sure that the leachate isn't leaking out of your landfill. These are the 4 requirements to be a sanitary landfill. This is basically the same idea that I just gave you, except these guys have one cool bonus. These guys have gas collection. They take all the methane that is forming anaerobic decomposition, right? Organic material without oxygen puts the carbon next to hydrogens, and that makes methane. So all the anaerobic gas that's coming out of the landfill, they collect it here, and then they either flare it off because methane is a greenhouse gas, turning it into CO2 is better, right? Because methane is a stronger greenhouse gas than CO2. So you have to light it on fire, or you can actually spin turbines and get that stuff on the power grid. So that would be called methane recovery or energy recovery from this landfill. If you Google these diagrams, you'll get 10,000 different ways to meet those 4 requirements. So here's your impermeable layer. In this case, they have 2 liners. Here's your leachate collection. Here's your external leachate testing and your monitoring system. And then here's your impermeable cap, the outer layer. All right. Thank you for watching my big clump of study goals. We have other stuff to talk about trash, but that'll be separate videos.